In the early morning hours of a September night in 1988, the peaceful calm of a Los Angeles suburban neighborhood was abruptly broken. The residence of Mickey Thompson and his wife Trudy became a crime scene, one that would come to symbolize a dark turn in the life of the American motorsport community. The two were found dead inside their home under circumstances that defied easy explanation. Upon arrival, officers from the Los Angeles Police Department were met with a scene that was both unsettling and puzzling. The house showed no signs of forced entry. Doors and windows remained intact, secured as if the occupants had expected no intrusion. Yet within, both Mickey and Trudy Thompson lay dead, victims of a violent attack that bore all the hallmarks of a calculated act. Mickey Thompson was far from an ordinary victim. His name was synonymous with speed and innovation. A celebrated figure in the racing world, he had set multiple land speed records and was known for his relentless pursuit of victory. Trudy Thompson, his wife, was not only a companion but a pillar of support in an environment where the stakes were high and trust was a fragile commodity. The initial call to police came from a neighbor who noticed something amiss late the previous evening when the Thompsons failed to attend a scheduled event. Emergency responders found the couple inside their home, the scene immediately marked as a high-profile homicide. The lack of forced entry prompted investigators to consider that the perpetrator was likely someone known to the victims, a figure who had access and a motive. This assumption would guide much of the early investigation, shaping interview strategies and forensic searches. Detailed forensic examination at the scene began without delay. Crime scene technicians meticulously documented every trace: shell casings recovered from the living room, possible fingerprints on door handles and furniture, and microscopic fibers that seemed out of place. The autopsy results would later confirm that the attack was swift and brutal, executed with precision suggesting prior planning. The weapon used, a handgun recovered near the scene, was registered to someone within the Thompsons' close circle, complicating the narrative and narrowing the pool of suspects. Yet no immediate arrest was made. Instead, detectives embarked on a methodical process to untangle relationships, conflicts, and secrets hidden beneath the glossy surface of the Thompsons' public life. Witness statements added layers of complexity. Neighbors reported hearing raised voices earlier that evening, but accounts differed on who was involved and the nature of the dispute. Security footage from nearby homes showed fleeting shadows, but gaps in recording left critical moments undocumented. One detective summarized the situation with a phrase that would echo throughout the investigation: "The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem." The implication was clear. The scene had been staged or carefully controlled to mislead. Financial records soon became a focal point. The Thompsons' business dealings, partnerships, and financial stress points emerged as potential motives. Investigators identified Michael Goodwin, a former business partner of Mickey Thompson, whose relationship with the Thompsons had deteriorated amid allegations of fraud and betrayal. As forensic teams continued their work, collecting evidence piece by piece, the investigation shifted toward uncovering digital and financial footprints that might illuminate the motive and identify the killer. The challenge was immense. The case was no longer just about physical evidence, but about interpreting a mosaic of behavioral clues and circumstantial evidence. In a city where success often hides shadows of rivalry and resentment, this murder exposed fault lines beneath the veneer. The loss of Mickey and Trudy Thompson was more than a personal tragedy. It was a public spectacle, a case that would test the limits of forensic science and law enforcement resolve. For the investigators, the stakes were high. The community watched closely as each piece of evidence was scrutinized, each lead pursued. The case demanded patience and precision. A misstep could mean justice denied. By the end of this first phase, it was clear the case would be anything but straightforward. The absence of forced entry, the careful nature of the attack, and the tangled web of relationships pointed to a killer operating not in haste, but with deliberate intent. This initial forensic and investigative groundwork set the stage for a deeper dive into the evidence, data that would gradually reveal the cold reality behind the tragedy. In the investigation of the Thompsons' murders, the focus quickly expanded beyond the physical crime scene. The forensic team knew that the material evidence alone would not solve the case. In a city like Los Angeles, where technology intersects with daily life, digital footprints often tell stories that witnesses won't. Surveillance logs, phone records, and financial transactions became the next frontier in piecing together the timeline and uncovering the perpetrator's identity. Early in the probe, detectives requested access to surveillance footage from cameras near the Thompsons' residence. Although the neighborhood was residential and not heavily monitored, a few nearby businesses had cameras with partial views of the street. Analysis revealed several anomalies. One particular recording showed a vehicle pulling up near the house just after 10 p.m., matching the general time frame when the Thompsons were believed to be last alive. The vehicle's license plate was partially obscured by poor lighting and angle, but investigators were able to enhance the footage enough to identify the make and model. No official records tied the vehicle directly to the Thompsons or their immediate circle. This raised questions. Was this an unknown visitor or someone familiar attempting to conceal their identity? Detectives followed this lead by cross-referencing DMV records, narrowing down possible owners. Meanwhile, forensic analysis of phone records became crucial. Calls made and received by the Thompsons in the 48 hours leading to the murders showed unusual patterns. A series of late-night calls to an unregistered number piqued interest. These calls lasted mere seconds, consistent with pinging to check if the recipient was available without engaging in conversation. This suggested covert communication. The phone belonging to Mickey Thompson also revealed deleted texts that forensic experts worked to recover. Among the fragments were references to a deteriorating business relationship and veiled threats. The digital recovery process took weeks, peeling back layers of data obscured by deliberate deletion. The recovered texts hinted at mounting tensions, but stopped short of naming suspects directly. Detectives also uncovered inconsistencies in the Thompsons' bank records. Large cash withdrawals were made days before the incident, raising the question of whether financial motives played a role. This discovery prompted a deeper financial audit, tracing money flows between the Thompsons and their partners. In towns like Los Angeles, murders aren't just crimes. They tear at the fabric of a complex, interconnected community. The digital data began to sketch a pattern of fractured trust and secret dealings. Investigators noted the subtle but telling detail that some surveillance footage timestamps did not align perfectly with other logs. Was this a technical glitch or a deliberate attempt to manipulate the timeline? The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem, one detective remarked privately. The near-perfect sequence of events suggested that someone might have engineered the digital trail to mislead. Forensic specialists expanded their scope to include computer hard drives found in the Thompsons' home office. An in-depth analysis of emails and digital correspondence revealed a heated dispute between Mickey Thompson and a former business partner. The partner's identity was obscured by pseudonyms and messages, but cross-referencing IP addresses and other metadata indicated a recurring source. Interviews with associates painted a picture of escalating tension, but the missing piece was direct evidence tying any individual to the crime. Investigators faced the challenge of connecting digital breadcrumbs to physical action. Throughout this phase, law enforcement kept a tight control over information release. Public interest in the case was intense, and premature disclosure could compromise the investigation. The digital trail was a double-edged sword. It could expose the killer, or it could drown the inquiry in false leads. The painstaking forensic work laid a foundation for understanding the motives and movements surrounding the Thompsons' final hours. Each recovered byte of data was a potential breakthrough, each anomaly a red flag. While forensic teams combed through the Thompsons' digital footprints, another team shifted focus toward their financial records, a necessary step in understanding not just how the victims lived, but how they might have been pushed toward their deaths. In homicide investigations, especially those involving high-profile individuals, money often becomes the clearest, coldest motive. A comprehensive financial audit was ordered. Investigators obtained search warrants for the Thompsons' banking records, personal and corporate accounts, and any trusts or shell companies linked to their ventures. The first finding came quickly. In the weeks leading up to the murders, the Thompsons had liquidated over $100,000 in personal assets. The cash was moved into accounts with tighter security, but not hidden. It was an odd move for a couple with consistent income and no significant signs of financial distress on the surface. Further review revealed additional irregularities. A series of small, repeated withdrawals had been made over several months, amounts too small individually to trigger automatic bank reports, but when totaled, suggested a strategic draining of liquid assets. These withdrawals coincided almost exactly with escalating legal tensions between Mickey Thompson and former business partners. Of particular interest was a set of court filings retrieved from Los Angeles Superior Court archives. Mickey Thompson had recently initiated civil proceedings against Michael Goodwin, alleging breach of contract, fraud, and misappropriation of funds related to a motorsport promotion venture that had collapsed years prior. The civil lawsuit sought millions in damages and was scheduled to go to trial within months. The timing was notable. The risk of public exposure and financial ruin for certain parties was imminent. Investigators cross-referenced these legal disputes with the phone and email records already recovered. The tone of the correspondence shifted from professional disagreements to personal animosity. Although names were carefully avoided in the most incriminating exchanges, metadata linked the threats to devices belonging to known individuals in the Thompsons' former business network. Meanwhile, forensic accountants identified another concerning pattern: payments made to unknown third parties through cashier's checks. The sums were modest but consistent, always just below the reporting threshold. Attempts to trace the checks led to dead ends, addresses linked to vacant properties, names tied to defunct corporations. It suggested layers of obfuscation, a deliberate attempt to mask financial flows. One of the lead investigators noted during a case briefing, "When people start moving money in cash and checks instead of wire transfers, they're trying to keep something off the books." It was a red flag that warranted closer scrutiny. The financial data painted a picture of a man, Mickey Thompson, who was preparing for battle, tightening financial defenses, consolidating power in anticipation of a drawn-out legal conflict. But someone else was preparing too, taking measures to ensure that battle would never take place in court. Interviews with accountants, attorneys, and close business associates were conducted under oath. Several individuals confirmed that Mickey had expressed concerns about his safety in the months leading to his death. One former colleague recounted a meeting where Mickey stated, "If anything happens to me, it won't be an accident." In towns like Los Angeles, power struggles aren't played out in open fields. They happen in boardrooms, over contracts, and sometimes in the darkest corners where paper trails end and blood is spilled. Despite the breakthroughs, gaps remained. Investigators still lacked direct evidence tying the financial manipulations to the murders. But the mounting circumstantial evidence, the strained finances, the pending lawsuits, the veiled threats, tightened the circle around potential suspects. Forensic banking specialists were brought in to dissect every transaction. Patterns of behavior were analyzed: timing of withdrawals, recipients of transfers, overlaps with travel logs. Some patterns aligned too neatly, reinforcing the suspicion that the financial turmoil wasn't coincidental, but a deliberate pressure campaign culminating in violence. One detective posed the question aloud during a team meeting: was this murder just about stopping the lawsuit, or was it about destroying Mickey Thompson's legacy altogether? It was a chilling thought. In cases like this, the motive wasn't just to kill a man, but to erase the threat he represented, to silence him permanently before the public reckoning could begin. The forensic focus now shifted, with the financial records painting an increasingly hostile landscape around the Thompsons. Investigators moved aggressively into verifying alibis. The task was straightforward in theory: cross-reference physical locations, times, and witness testimonies. But in practice, the inconsistencies surfaced almost immediately, revealing deeper fractures in the narratives presented by key figures. Los Angeles County Sheriff's detectives conducted parallel interviews with associates, business partners, friends, and employees who had contact with the Thompsons in the final 72 hours. A pattern of half-truths and selective memories emerged. Not overt lies, but subtle shifts, changes in times, details omitted, vague recollections when clarity was expected. The first major discrepancy came from a former business partner who had initially confirmed attending a late-evening meeting with Mickey Thompson just days prior to the murders. The individual's original statement indicated a time frame between 7 p.m. and 9 p.m. However, phone metadata extracted from Mickey's records showed a call made to the partner at 8:47 p.m., indicating that no meeting was underway at that time. A second call at 9:12 p.m., left unanswered, further contradicted the account. Detectives obtained surveillance footage from a nearby gas station where the same individual claimed to have been during the time of the murders. The timestamp on the footage showed a transaction at 11:37 p.m., hours later than the window they had stated under oath. Moreover, the receipt from the gas station indicated a cash purchase, a deviation from the credit card pattern the individual normally exhibited. When confronted, the partner attributed the discrepancy to confusion and stress from the tragedy. While plausible on the surface, the inconsistencies raised suspicion internally. In cases like this, seasoned investigators knew that small timeline manipulations often indicated larger deceptions. Further scrutiny revealed additional anomalies. One acquaintance reported seeing an unfamiliar vehicle near the Thompsons' residence the night of the murders, a dark sedan, idling with its lights off. While vague, this sighting aligned with the vehicle captured on grainy surveillance footage referenced in the earlier forensic review. Cross-referencing vehicle registrations linked to individuals of interest yielded a potential match, but not enough for immediate action. The investigative team began reconstructing a movement timeline for every person with a financial, personal, or professional stake in the Thompsons' downfall. GPS pings from cell phones, card swipe data from ATMs, and surveillance footage created a lattice of information. Most individuals fit cleanly within the expected framework. A few, however, presented troubling gaps. One former associate reported being at home during the night in question, but failed to produce corroborating evidence such as credit card usage, cell phone activity, or third-party verification. A forensic analysis of their cell phone records revealed a near-total absence of data during a critical 2-hour window. No outgoing or incoming communications, no pings to local towers. While not conclusive of guilt, the silence was deafening. In investigations like this, absence isn't just a void, it's a statement, a lead investigator commented during the nightly debriefing. The investigators continued pressing. Subtle pressure in follow-up interviews led to contradictions. One individual admitted to going for a drive to clear their head without being able to specify a route or destination. Another revised their original timeline without prompting, a behavior known to indicate deception under interview standards. Meanwhile, forensic technicians revisited the crime scene analysis. They identified small but telling details. The positioning of certain objects suggested familiarity with the household layout, and an absence of defensive wounds on the victims suggested they had been ambushed by someone they did not perceive as an immediate threat. Behavioral profilers were consulted. Their analysis pointed toward a perpetrator who likely had a personal vendetta, harbored long-standing resentment, and possessed intimate knowledge of the Thompsons' routines and vulnerabilities. The emerging profile ruled out opportunistic crime or random violence. This had been targeted, precise, and deeply personal. In towns like Los Angeles, betrayal is rarely a sudden event. It grows over time, hidden under layers of civility until the facade breaks. By consolidating witness inconsistencies, forensic gaps, and movement anomalies, investigators slowly narrowed the field. Each contradictory statement wasn't just a mistake. It was a roadmap leading closer to the individual willing to orchestrate murder to settle debts that could not be erased by lawsuits alone. The investigation entered a new phase when physical evidence began yielding unexpected developments. Until this point, the case had relied heavily on financial records, digital forensics, and the dissection of alibis. However, investigators understood that a conviction would require hard, material proof, evidence that could withstand scrutiny in a courtroom where reasonable doubt was the defense's primary weapon. Search warrants were executed at properties associated with individuals whose alibis had fractured under prior examination. Priority was given to locations tied to known business associates who had both motive and opportunity. Each search was methodical, conducted with the understanding that critical evidence would not be obvious but carefully concealed or even deliberately destroyed. The first major breakthrough came during a secondary search of a storage facility rented under the name of a corporate entity linked to a former associate. In a corner unit, behind a wall of disused office furniture, detectives found a duffel bag containing clothing items, gloves, and a pair of boots caked with residue. The clothing matched no immediate description related to the crime scene. However, forensic analysts retrieved minute trace evidence from the fabric, dust and organic particulates consistent with environmental samples taken from the Thompsons' property. More critically, the boots bore microscopic traces of blood spatter. Preliminary tests returned positive for human blood. Full DNA sequencing was ordered immediately. Further analysis of the bag's contents revealed another key detail: a pair of latex gloves, the interior surfaces bearing fingerprints despite an apparent attempt to wipe them clean. The fingerprints were partial but sufficient for comparison. Analysts cross-referenced these prints against the database assembled from all interview subjects linked to the investigation. During simultaneous searches, a forensic team uncovered shredded documents at a private office rented by another associate. Reconstruction of these documents showed fragments of what appeared to be draft communications, notes discussing financial settlements, resolving disputes quietly, and other phrases that indicated foreknowledge of potential conflicts with Mickey Thompson. When the DNA results returned, they confirmed the blood on the boots belonged to Trudy Thompson. This was no longer circumstantial. It was direct physical linkage between a suspect and the crime scene, the kind of evidence prosecutors rely on to build a foundation for first-degree murder charges. Investigators also discovered inconsistencies in the wear patterns on the recovered boots. The treads contained particles of crushed stone, identical in composition to the unique gravel mixture used on the Thompsons' driveway. Gravel that had been specially ordered and was not common to the general Los Angeles area. The defense would undoubtedly argue contamination or secondary transfer, but the forensic sequencing was tightening. Each new discovery narrowed the timeline, localized movement, and closed the gap between suspicion and proof. One of the lead forensic specialists remarked, "This isn't just about finding blood or gravel. It's about mapping intent. Whoever wore those boots was there with a purpose, and they weren't there to visit." In parallel, detectives interviewed staff at the storage facility. Records indicated that the unit had been accessed late at night within 48 hours following the murders. Video surveillance showed a figure matching the general description of a person already on the suspect list. Although the footage was grainy, time-stamped data aligned too neatly with gaps in that individual's reported movements. By forensic standards, the chain of evidence was holding. Each artifact, boot, glove, document fragment, was cataloged, photographed, and tested to preserve evidentiary integrity. Search teams extended their efforts to dumpsters, surrounding warehouses, and even neighboring properties. Items retrieved included a burner phone, wrapped in a cloth and buried under general refuse. Forensic examination recovered partial communications, several messages linked back to numbers previously flagged during the digital review. Another strand in the widening web. In towns like Los Angeles, secrets don't disappear easily. They just get buried deeper, waiting for someone determined enough to dig them up. The combination of physical evidence, linked timelines, and behavioral inconsistencies moved the case toward an inevitable confrontation. Yet investigators remained cautious. Hard evidence carried weight, but prosecutions were built on narratives woven tightly around that evidence. Narratives that would have to withstand aggressive cross-examination. Internal reviews flagged a caution. While the physical evidence was strong, defense attorneys would likely claim that items were planted, contaminated, or found too late to be reliable. The burden rested on investigators to prove an unbroken chain of custody and to frame the evidence within the clear motive and opportunity previously established. Still, the mood among the task force shifted. Where before there was only suspicion and circumstantial dots, now there was connective tissue: blood, gravel, fingerprints, movement patterns. Pieces were falling into place, not by chance but through relentless forensic rigor. As physical evidence mounted and timelines solidified, investigators turned their attention to the human element, specifically the psychological profiles of those closest to the Thompsons and their roles in the unfolding tragedy. Understanding the mindset of suspects and witnesses is critical in piecing together the motives behind such calculated violence. Behavioral analysts were brought in to review statements, body language during interviews, and known histories. The goal was to identify inconsistencies, hidden resentments, and stress responses that might signal deception or culpability. Every nuance in an interview room can be as telling as forensic evidence collected from a crime scene. One subject under close scrutiny was a former business partner whose financial dealings had become intertwined with Mickey Thompson's legal disputes. Psychological evaluation noted a pattern of evasiveness, shifting narratives when pressed and exhibiting heightened agitation when questioned about specific transactions. These behaviors aligned with common indicators of guilt or concealment. Simultaneously, investigators analyzed voice recordings from various interviews, focusing on verbal cues and speech patterns. Changes in tone, hesitation, and avoidance of direct answers were cataloged. Such forensic linguistics offered additional layers of insight into who might be withholding truth. Alongside psychological profiles, interrogation teams employed carefully structured techniques. Interviews were staggered over weeks to observe shifts in consistency and emotional response. Investigators noted how subjects responded under pressure, sometimes revealing cracks in their accounts. The forensic psychologists emphasized the importance of understanding personal histories. Several key individuals showed signs of long-standing grievances, professional jealousy, or financial desperation. These factors provided context for potential motives and indicated risk for escalation into violence. One particular interview revealed a subject's struggle with perceived betrayal, referencing past business dealings that turned sour and cost more than just money. While no direct admission was made, the emotional undercurrent suggested unresolved conflicts that could lead to extreme actions. Throughout this phase, the investigative team maintained a delicate balance, applying pressure without provoking false confessions or aggressive defensiveness. The integrity of each interview was paramount to ensure admissible evidence. In towns like Los Angeles, murders aren't just crimes, they tear at the fabric of a quiet community. Behind every case file lies a network of human stories, ambition, betrayal, fear, that shape the truth. The psychological profiles guided investigative priorities, focusing resources on individuals whose mental states and behavioral patterns aligned with the circumstances of the crime. This approach refined the suspect pool, making subsequent forensic and legal steps more precise. In this phase, investigators also revisited autopsy reports with forensic pathologists to understand victim responses and possible struggle indicators. The absence of defensive wounds aligned with behavioral profiles suggesting the victims knew their assailant, underscoring the personal nature of the crime. The cumulative effect of psychological and forensic data drove the case forward, solidifying the prosecution's ability to connect motive, means, and opportunity. These human factors translated cold forensic data into a narrative of intent and consequence. The investigation reached a pivotal turning point as forensic science yielded new, irrefutable evidence. Up until this phase, much of the case depended on circumstantial data, financial motives, behavioral analysis, and inconsistencies in alibis. Now, physical evidence began to solidify the timeline and directly link suspects to the crime scene, moving the inquiry from suspicion to near certainty. Forensic teams revisited previously collected samples with more advanced techniques. Trace analysis revealed fibers on the victim's clothing that matched textiles recovered from a suspect's property. These fibers were not common materials but rather specific to garments manufactured by a niche supplier, strengthening the associative evidence. DNA profiling provided further breakthroughs. Small skin cells found under the victim's fingernails matched profiles from individuals within the Thompsons' business circle. While defensive wounds were minimal, these microscopic traces suggested a struggle occurred, contradicting initial assumptions of complete surprise. One critical discovery was a partial fingerprint found on a piece of discarded paper within the Thompsons' home office. The print was degraded but forensically enhanced using emerging fingerprint visualization technology. It matched a known associate whose earlier statements contained discrepancies. Investigators also analyzed data from a burner phone recovered in the waste, which contained deleted messages referencing planned meetings and financial settlements related to the Thompsons. Forensic recovery specialists managed to retrieve metadata, revealing timestamps that aligned with movements captured on surveillance footage. Moreover, forensic analysis of the murder weapon uncovered microscopic residues linking it to the suspect's vehicle, previously captured on security footage near the crime scene. Ballistic experts confirmed the weapon matched shell casings recovered at the scene, confirming it as the murder weapon. The forensic sequencing created a comprehensive mosaic. Physical evidence, digital trails, and behavioral clues intersected at key points, all converging on a tightly knit suspect group. Despite this, investigators maintain caution. Defense strategies would inevitably challenge evidence admissibility, contamination risk, and chain of custody. This awareness reinforced the need for meticulous documentation and cross-verification. In towns like Los Angeles, murders aren't just crimes. They tear at the fabric of a quiet community. Each forensic breakthrough doesn't just solve a puzzle, it exposes the fractures beneath. Investigators noted that the data, while powerful, aligned suspiciously cleanly. The data aligned too cleanly. Sometimes that was the problem, a forensic analyst reflected. This prompted deeper scrutiny of every link, ensuring no piece was overlooked or artificially placed. This chapter marked a turning point, from piecing together motives and movements to assembling incontrovertible proof. The trajectory toward prosecution was now clear, but the stakes had never been higher. The case against the accused entered its most critical phase as it moved into the courtroom. What had been a complex mosaic of forensic evidence, behavioral analysis, and financial records was now distilled into a formal legal proceeding. The trial would be the moment when every piece of data, every testimony, and every forensic finding faced rigorous scrutiny. Prosecutors opened their case by systematically presenting physical evidence. Detailed forensic reports were introduced, highlighting the DNA matches, fiber analysis, ballistic confirmations, and recovered digital communications. Each element was carefully connected to the defendant's movements and interactions, establishing presence and opportunity with forensic certainty. Expert witnesses took the stand to explain the significance of trace evidence, the reliability of forensic technology used, and the interpretation of behavioral patterns. Prosecutors emphasized the methodical nature of the investigation and the precision of the evidence chain. Defense counsel attempted to undermine credibility, questioning contamination risks and procedural integrity, but the prosecution countered with documented evidence of strict chain of custody and corroborating findings. Witness testimonies revealed the fracturing relationships and the mounting tensions leading up to the murders. Key associates detailed disputes and threats, while forensic psychologists outlined behavioral indicators consistent with the defendant's intent and state of mind. The defendant's demeanor during the trial was carefully observed. Moments of denial, silence, and rare admissions formed part of the narrative, but never fully contradicted the overwhelming forensic case. The defense struggled to offer an alternative theory supported by tangible evidence. Jury deliberations reflected the strength of the prosecution's forensic presentation. The combination of physical proof and comprehensive investigative work left little room for reasonable doubt. After thorough discussion, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on charges of first-degree murder. Sentencing followed swiftly. The defendant received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. The judgment reaffirmed the justice system's capacity to deliver accountability based on evidence and procedure. Beyond the legal outcome, the trial's impact rippled through the community. The Thompsons' family faced an irrevocable loss, their grief tempered only by the certainty that justice had been served. The broader community, once shaken by the violence, found reassurance in the meticulous work that led to resolution. In towns like Los Angeles, murders aren't just crimes, they tear at the fabric of a quiet community. The lessons from this case extend beyond individual guilt, highlighting the vital role of forensic science, disciplined investigation, and legal rigor in confronting complex violent crimes. This tragedy underscored the dangers lurking behind fractured trust, unresolved conflicts, and unchecked ambition. It served as a warning that justice requires vigilance and that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, can be uncovered through relentless pursuit. As someone who's seen how quickly trust can shatter and lives can change, I want to leave you with this. Vigilance and honesty in our relationships aren't just ideals, they're lifelines. This story reminds us that unresolved conflicts and unchecked ambition can lead to devastating consequences. What would you do if faced with betrayal or hardship? How do you protect the ones you love when the stakes are high? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. If this story resonated with you, Please subscribe so you won't miss the next episode. And if it didn't, tell me why. I'm here to bring you stories that matter.